Netanyahu knows that once the war ends, his political career probably ends too, and so he's got an interest in keeping all of this going, which is why we haven't really seen him do much in terms of trying to agree that ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza. At the moment, we're hearing a lot about a ceasefire. The US, UK and France and other countries have come together overnight to urge a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. I think that's going to be pretty difficult to agree on, because Hezbollah has said that in order for there to be any type of ceasefire, there needs to be a ceasefire in Gaza. And I'm not sure we're going to see that suddenly materialise, because obviously discussions about a ceasefire in Gaza have been going on for months and they haven't come to fruition yet. So I do think, given all of that, we probably are going to see some sort of ground invasion. We've got Israeli reserve forces in the north of Israel preparing to go in. We've had a senior Israeli commander speaking yesterday, basically warning the troops to be prepared to go into southern Lebanon. And the military experts that I've been speaking to over the last few days believe that what we've seen so far in terms of the air bombardments are obviously achieving some success in terms of destroying Hezbollah infrastructure. But in reality, you would need a ground invasion to sort of fully push back those militants from the sort of border regions north of the Litani River.
Israel, I think, has said that what they've done so far is set the Hezbollah group back 20 years. It seems like if ever there was an opportunity then to go in, this would surely be it.
Yes, of course, and also we've had those pager and walkie-talkie attacks, which are believed to have disabled more than 1,000 Hezbollah militants. And so, yes, you would argue that now is the time to strike whilst they sort of seem to be at their weakest. Obviously, in terms of the idea that Hezbollah has been 20% of their military capability has been affected. That obviously hasn't been verified, but they're obviously going to have had a lot of rocket launchers, military infrastructure destroyed over the last few days, because Israel has attacked hundreds and hundreds of targets. Obviously, by doing that, they've also killed lots of civilians, including women and children in the process.
A lot's been made, hasn't it, politically, about how this has been beneficial to Benjamin Netanyahu. It seems like there's very few Israelis who don't support what he has done, and his sort of positive ratings have increased, I think, to the highest point they've been since October the 7th. And then another element has been how expensive it is for Israel to keep the families who have had to move away from the border in temporary accommodation. So you can understand why Benjamin Netanyahu might want to continue, but I haven't seen too much made of how expensive war can be itself. They've obviously got one going on in Gaza. They're trying to keep control of the West Bank. I wonder how easily or how well they can afford then a sort of third front, as it were.
Yeah, well, on your first point, Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure politically to move those people from the north back to the north, because, as you say, they are in temporary accommodation and they want to go back home. And so that's why he's saying he's launching this offensive in the first place, because he wants to see people go back there. Also, if you speak to a lot of commentators, Netanyahu knows that once the war ends, his political career probably ends too. And so he's got an interest in keeping all of this going, which is why we haven't really seen him do much in terms of trying to agree that ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza. And in terms of the cost of war, I mean, Israel is going to be spending a hell of a lot of money. Every missile that they fire is going to cost tens of thousands of pounds. And so that they are going to be mindful of that. This can't go on forever. And in the same way with Hezbollah, obviously, all of their equipment is going to be costing a lot of money. They're getting a lot of it from Iran, but Iran probably would be able to send them more if they end up running out. But they are believed to have tens of thousands of rockets and missiles left.
Yeah, I want to come on to some of the elements of your piece about that in just a moment. But before we do, you mentioned these sort of Western calls for this 21-day ceasefire, potentially to avoid all-out war, which, the US, the UK, France, various countries have signed. But I noticed Qatar, who I think has been the mediator with regards to Gaza, has said there are no formal mediators currently in place for mediation around Lebanon. How quickly could they mobilise a group of mediators for a situation like this?
I think they could probably do it pretty quickly. Obviously we've seen Qatar playing a leading role in all of this when it comes to Gaza. They were extremely frustrated when Netanyahu decided to, we believe Netanyahu decided to authorise that attack against Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, whilst he was in Iran. He was the chief negotiator on behalf of Hamas at the time. And I'm sure that other countries will be willing to step in. This could all happen quite quickly if Israel and Hezbollah are willing to accept a ceasefire. And obviously everybody's at the UN at the moment in New York, so they'll all be talking together anyway. So it could be an opportune moment to bring such a thing in. But I just kind of see it as quite unlikely unless we see movement on the Gaza situation as well.
Now, I want to go into your piece where you talk about Hezbollah's capabilities and what effectively awaits Israel if they do decide to go in on the ground. You say they're considered one of the most heavily armed non-state militia groups in the world. Its army, for example, is tens of thousands strong, with estimates suggesting it has more than 150,000 missiles and rockets of all types. To me, I would imagine that would put Israel off. But you're comparing a militia here with a country's military. So, what are the comparisons there? Why would it not put Israel off?
Well, the experts I've spoken to say that it would be extreme folly for Israel to launch a ground invasion because, there are many reasons. Firstly, Hezbollah has this network of underground tunnels under southern Lebanon. And in theory, if you've got Israeli troops going into the south, Hezbollah might pop up behind them and be able to destroy tanks or kill people. They also know the terrain really well. The terrain's quite hilly. There are lots of valleys. The Hezbollah fighters can obviously launch rockets from sort of surprise locations that the Israelis aren't going to be able to see from the ground. And so it's going to be pretty difficult for Israel to move forward on the ground. However, it does depend slightly on what Israel has managed to destroy so far. Obviously, they've not been able to get into those underground tunnels, so Hezbollah are going to still be able to launch these missiles from underground. But obviously, they've managed to destroy what they say a lot of the launch systems above ground. So it's going to be a really tricky one. It also depends what Israel's war aims are. Like, how far do they want to push into southern Lebanon? Are they going to attack Beirut airports? That could be another sort of big escalation that would affect the West and British citizens. And it's all a little bit unclear at the moment, but in 2006, when they last had this situation, there was an effective stalemate at the end of it. Since then, Hezbollah has managed to build up its capabilities. It's now considered a very formidable force. Meanwhile, though, Israel's managed to build up its intelligence capabilities, and so it does have a better idea of where all of these Hezbollah targets are.
You mentioned that tunnels system. We know how difficult the Israelis have found the tunnel system in Gaza. This is far more sophisticated, right, than even anything Hamas have managed to create.
Yeah, and also it's been used for different purposes. So the tunnels under Gaza were sort of mainly used to circumvent the blockade and send aid, weapons and other equipment underground, whereas these tunnels are used sort of both tactically, so that Hezbollah would be able to, pop up anywhere and surprise an enemy force. But also there's lots of, missiles kept underground as well. And these tunnels are so vast that they've put out footage recently showing these huge lorries with missiles on them just driving through as if it's a highway underground. So if Israel really wants to get at those tunnels, it needs to have boots on the ground in southern Lebanon.
That being said, given what appears to be real opposition to this from the West, can Israel really go into Lebanon and expect victory, whatever they deem victory to be, without proper support from the West, presumably weaponry, that sort of thing coming in. All of that could stop effectively on a whim if the West wanted it to.
I think victory is very hard. It's hard to determine what that would look like exactly. I mean, Israel says that it wanted to, obliterate Hamas, but if you speak to any Western official leader, or even Bill Burns, the director of the CIA, recently said that you can't just destroy an entity like that because the ideology persists. And I think that's going to be the case with Hezbollah. You're already seeing that attacks against Hezbollah and the killing of civilians in Lebanon is going to mean that Hezbollah will get more support from the Lebanese people. And, normally the Lebanese people, the Christians, other people in Lebanon do not support Hezbollah. They don't want them there. They just want peace. And so I think if Israel does launch a ground invasion, there's only going to be more support for Hezbollah. So it might be able to destroy their military infrastructure, but I don't think it's going to achieve peace as a result.
Just finally, where is Iran? It's been incredibly quiet, but we know that they back Hezbollah. We know that certainly they would be very concerned if Israel went in with boots on the ground in Lebanon. And yet we seem to be hearing very little of them. Is the support kind of tacit, or is there explicit support? And if so, what is that at this moment in time?
I interviewed the Lebanese ambassador to the UK a few days ago, and he was saying that if Israel did launch a ground invasion, then it would be, the Lebanese armed forces would be forced to fight against Israel, which they haven't done so far. And he also said that if that was the case, then you're in the territory of an all-out regional war. And he said in that circumstance, you would end up potentially with Iran joining in. But you're right, so far we haven't really seen much from Iran. But I don't think that means that we're not going to. I think they're still probably trying to decide how exactly they respond to Israel's killing of Ismail Haniyeh, actually, and we've still not seen a proper response for that. But equally, Iran's leaders say that they'll take time to decide how to retaliate for such things. So I think we are going to see something, but obviously we haven't seen anything dramatic yet.
I do just want to ask one more on this. I should have probably put a bit earlier, but Hassan Nasrallah, this is the quote again in your piece, he's the leader of Hezbollah, said last week an Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon was not a threat but an historic opportunity. I just want to understand what you feel he meant by that.
I think it's all about this idea that Hezbollah will be in a better position on the ground to come up against Israel because it's essentially a guerrilla force that is better placed to taking on Israeli troops and tanks, where it can see them and exploit those opportunities in southern Lebanon, the terrain it knows so well. So I think his view is that Hezbollah's better placed to take out Israel in its own territory than it is to take out Israeli missiles and rockets being fired. Obviously, Hezbollah hasn't got its own air force, so it's going to fare much better on the ground.